And welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now 9:07 p.m. in a very grim, dismal, almost kind of impossible to live in city of Budapest. It's December the 17th, which means that there are still 4 more days to go in which the daylight will be even less than we have now. I mean, that's almost impossible to imagine. But no, there's still 4 more days, even less daylight, than the permanent grayness that engulfs us here. So that's the outlook or lack of outlook here in Budapest. But on a positive note, let me welcome everybody who has joined me on our live stream of Tuesday afternoon East Coast time live stream. Pitch black here, of course, but it's afternoon on the East Coast. So welcome everybody. And of course, the big news of the day, as you know, is the assassination in the Kremlin of Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, who was head of the Russian Army's nuclear, biological, chemical weapons defense forces. And, he's a 3-star general, so he's a very senior officer. And it all took place just a few miles from the Kremlin. Now, Ukraine has obviously accepted responsibility and has proudly boasted of this assassination, and says, well, this was a legitimate military target. And of course, the Americans who run the Ukrainian intelligence services, the Americans say, well, we don't run Ukraine's intelligence services. They make their own decisions. They do their own targeting. But very helpfully, the US media are on hand to repeat all the allegations and accusations against Kirillov that apparently Russia had been using chemical weapons in Ukraine. And that's really very interesting because while it's true that the United States had accused Russia of using chemical weapons, I think it accused us sometime earlier this year, April or May, the OPCW, which is after all no particular friend of Russia's, the OPCW says there's no conclusive evidence that anybody has used chemical weapons in Ukraine. So therefore, this accusation that the Western media are now repeating, every hour upon the hour, that well, of course, Ukraine had to take him out because the Russians have been using chemical weapons. But in fact, this isn't true. There's no evidence for this, that Russia has been using chemical weapons. It's by doing so, they, of course, legitimize this assassination. But of course, this assassination comes a week after another assassination of a cruise missile engineer, also in Moscow. And you get a sense of a pattern, which is that there's a kind of a free rein to carry out assassinations in Russia. And the interesting thing is that, first of all, Russia doesn't do anything comparable. We don't ever hear of any Ukrainian generals or Ukrainian political figures, even the nastiest, most vicious, and most belligerent of them, the ones who go around persecuting the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We never hear about any of assassinations, while the Western political leaders, and of course their media attack dogs, media serve no other purpose than to be attack dogs of Western political leaders who just repeat these accusations, say, oh, well, Russia's engaged in all kinds of terrorism in the West. It sets fires in warehouses, and of course, it carries out assassinations. Um, and as we said before, and I'm convinced of this, even though I can't prove it, but I'm convinced of that these fires in the warehouses or these explosions in storage places have come about because there is a fairly extensive trade in armaments, in weapons, in shells, and they are being stored in very unsafe environments, and they tend to blow up. That's what shells do. They blow up. If you don't store them properly, they will blow up. So I think so. Rather than acknowledge the fact that there's a very extensive black market in Europe of weaponry going to Ukraine, weaponry being shipped from Ukraine and into the West, instead of not acknowledging that and that this is giving rise to explosions, they say, oh no, it's all the Russians. And the Russians are carrying out assassinations. And then you ask, well, whom have the Russians assassinated? Then it's, the Skripals. The Skripals, it was a chemical weapons attack. The deadliest nerve agent known to man was unleashed against the Skripals. But of course, there's always been a real problem about that, which is, well, where are the Skripals? Why can't we see them, and why can't we hear from them as to their condition and what it felt like being victims of Russian chemical weapons attacks? But in fact, the Skripals have not only disappeared, never to be heard from at all. They're not permitted to testify at this inquest. There's another inquest. The British are very good at holding endless inquests. So inquest into the poisoning death of this woman, and it's claimed that it was the Russians who this was part of the side effect or the of the what happened to the Skripals. She came up on this perfume bottle, and then that had the nerve agent. So it's an inquest into what happened to her. But they said no, the Skripals can't possibly testify. But what about testifying with maybe voice distortion or anything like that? No. What can we do a live stream so they can testify via live stream? So we don't know where their location. No. Can they at least give a written deposition so that the written deposition can be read out in court? No. So that's it. That just vanished completely. These illustrious victims of a Russian nerve agent attack, this daring nerve agent attack, and no one gets to see or hear from them, even though this was now 6 years ago. Now, you can draw your own conclusions, but obviously the obvious conclusion is that the British are lying and have been lying from the start about the Skripals. The other conclusion, I have to say, and it's a somewhat morbid conclusion, is that the Skripals are dead. They've just been killed. They've been eliminated precisely because dead men tell no tales. I mean, it's, you really don't want them hanging around, and at any moment, one or other of the Skripals will get fed up with being essentially kept in prison by the British authorities. That they're going to break out and talk to the media, which is almost what happened. If you recall, Skripal's daughter, that she didn't talk to the media, but she picked up a phone and she telephoned a relative of hers in Moscow, and she had a brief conversation, and she said she was okay, and it didn't seem that she was in a particularly bad condition, but that conversation was halted very abruptly. The phone was taken away from her, and we never heard from her ever again. So therefore, you have to assume that probably they've just been bumped off, and therefore it's very convenient to maintain this fiction of the Skripal. But be that as it may, these assassinations in Russia have been continuing fairly consistently. We talked about obviously the murder of Daria Dugina, and now you have this the murder of this Igor Kirillov, very senior figure in the Russian high command, and it doesn't look that there's really going to be much of a response from the Kremlin. How do we know this? Well, because we've had assassinations before, and we didn't have much of a response from the Kremlin. And so, what do I think is going to happen? I would venture that tomorrow Russia will launch yet another attack on Ukraine's electric infrastructure, and the power stations are going to be hit, and some Ukrainians will be without power for a few hours tomorrow. But by evening, the power will be back. So not to worry. They'll be able to cook supper tomorrow evening. So that's the situation there. The other thing which is a little troubling was the visit by Medvedev, Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president. He's now, I think, deputy head of the Security Council. So he went to China to see Xi Jinping, and they have the usual banalities and boilerplate that you have at the end of a meeting. But what was interesting was that the Chinese were insisting that their position on Ukraine is no escalation, no provocation, and no fighting outside the current zone, no extension of the war outside of the current zone, which means Ukraine. Which means that since this was the communique that came out, so in other words, this was what the Chinese put out at the end of this meeting with Medvedev, in which they were pretty much telling the Russians that they will not accept Russia's extending this war outside of Ukraine. So in other words, when Putin responded to the ATACMS attack, he said that, well, now we will regard those NATO countries that assist Ukraine's attacks on us, we will regard them as legitimate military targets, as of course he should. But it's clear that China doesn't go along with this. That was a very clear message from that meeting with Medvedev, that China will not accept any extension of this war beyond the current zone of fighting. So basically, ruling out that we will not support an attack on NATO territory, which is not a very nice thing to do if you're this great, this limitless partner of Russia, and Russia is coming under attack from NATO. I mean, there's not, Putin's logic was impeccable, namely that Russia was being attacked by whatever medium range missiles. These missiles are being targeted. The trajectory, their flight path, everything is being determined by NATO, the United States, the UK, whoever. Ukraine does not have the capability. Ukraine does not have the satellite technology to be able to guide a missile to its target. So that was Putin's position. He said, well, it's NATO that is attacking our territory. And therefore, it's entirely legitimate for us to respond to this attack by NATO by attacking NATO territory. And now here's China telling Medvedev that will not accept this. So apparently China does accept NATO's right to attack Russian territory proper. This is your great ally, your great partner, your BRICS partner, your partner in rebuilding the world order to challenge Western hegemony. And you're pretty much just ruling out supporting Russia in its ability to retaliate properly. That's really very, very problematic because, of course, Russia does rely on China. I mean, Russia has lost its Western markets for its energy, and therefore it needs China and it needs India, because that's how it makes money. Now, China is already negotiating brutally in trying to drive down the prices of its energy imports. And it's quite likely that Trump, who will immediately, on day one, on January the 20th, 2025, Trump will order a massive drilling enterprise, drill, baby, drill. He's going to drill for oil. He's going to, go for fracking. He's going to dig coal, wherever there's anything to be extracted from the ground, Trump will be extracting from the ground. So all of that is going to have the effect of driving down energy prices. And that's obviously going to be a serious problem for Russia. Moreover, Trump knows that this is going to be a serious problem for Russia. And he has said explicitly that that's what he intends to do, because he said, hey, this is what we did during the Cold War. This is what Reagan did during the Cold War. We're going to do it. So that's a quite problematic, looking forward to that. The other thing is that China has been cooperating with the Western sanctions against Russia. There are all kinds of projects, Asian Development Bank, Shanghai Cooperation Organization projects that were supposedly going to go ahead in Russia, but China pulled the plug on them because it didn't want to run afoul of the West. So again, the limitless partnership apparently has very severe limits, and clearly Russia does not and is unable to cross China, and obviously China knows this. That was that communique that was issued after the meeting with Medvedev was a real rebuke to Russia. I mean, China making clear what it's not going to put up with. So I bring this up because again, we all the time on the internet we're hearing about how well Russia's just going to go ahead, war of attrition, they're going to crush Ukraine, so on and so forth, so forth. But here we have the obvious constrictions that are being imposed by Russia's allies. No, never mind NATO. This is Russia's allies, and I think that's a real problem. Um, the the other thing is that Putin said that when he was, I think it was yesterday, yeah, the 16th day, when he was talking to the Ministry of Defense, he said, "Oh well, we recruit 300,000 men a year. 300,000 men. They sign up. He says this year it's been even better. We have about 400,000 or something have signed up this year on contract. So they're on contract, which means they get some money. I don't know how big this sum of money is, but some money is the sign up bonus. Now the problem is that that sounds like a lot, but it really isn't a great deal because all right, you got 400,000. Let's say it's going before the end of the year, it's going to go up to 450,000 have signed up on contract this year. We have to then assume that some soldiers who had signed up a contract will be leaving their post. Their term will have come to an end, and they're going to go home, to their families and enjoy whatever money they managed to get through signing up. And then, of course, there are those who were killed. Obviously, very very sad. And of course, there are those who have been disabled for life. I mean, so in other words, they're still alive, but they've been fundamentally disabled, and therefore they're not going to be able to go on serving. So, if you add up those numbers, let's say, okay, 450,000, it could well be, let's say 100,000, 150,000 return. Or either go back to their homes and their families, or return, in a casket, or return, fatally, or returns very seriously wounded. The point is that these are not the kinds of numbers that you're going to need to win this kind of a war. We talk about World War I, we talk about World War II. Those were wars fought with millions and millions and millions of men on both sides. This wasn't a few hundred thousand. This was millions of men. That's the only way that you can make your numbers count. A few hundred thousand, that's not going to make that doesn't make your strength count, because the Ukrainians can produce a few 100,000 recruits, and I think they are. So in terms of how many soldiers are facing off against one another in Ukraine, the numbers are pretty comparable. The Russians have not put in the field the numbers sufficient to make them count, to be able to destroy the Ukrainian army, which is what you need. You need to have big numbers. You need to have a good 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to 1 ratio to be able to just knock the other side out, and that isn't happening. So while Putin was impressing this Ministry of Defense by these numbers, we got 300,000 a year signing up, and because these are volunteers, so you say, well, these are volunteers, okay. He doesn't want to introduce conscription, fine, but that just isn't enough. It's absolutely is not enough to win a war. 300,000, 400,000, it's not going to be enough. And that's why, um, in addition to the problem with China, and I think that's going to be a real problem. Um, I think Putin will be very tempted to accept the Trump offer. Um, and I know people say, "Oh, he's going to turn it around." Nah, we're not interested. We want to go for an all-out victory. Well, I know you'd like to go for an all-out victory, um, but if you don't have the resources in place, then you're not going to go for an all-out victory. I mean, it cannot be done. Now, the one thing, I mean, if Trump is smart, he will we know the outlines of it. We've talked about this before. He's going to say ceasefire in place. Um, Ukraine abjures for the time being, trying to get back the land that is now under Russian occupation. So he's going to he's going to hold off on trying to get that land back. In the meantime, we're going to go on arming Ukraine. We're going to deploy missiles and so on. Send everything we've got. We're going to churn stuff out again. This is part of Trump's industrial revitalization of America. We're just going to produce, and then give them all to Ukraine. Now, obviously, that's not a good deal for Russia, because then it just means the war starts up again in 5 to 10 years. So if Trump is smart and he wants this deal to be done, and who knows whether he really wants this deal or not, but let's assume he's going to make this up. He's going to make an effort starting on January the 20th. He's going to try and bring this war to an end. He says he's going to, so let's assume he is going to make this effort. Then I think he will go to the Russians and give the Russians what they've been asking for. I mean, even if it's not, it isn't terribly isn't terribly meaningful. But he said, okay, we will have a peace conference. We'll have a global peace conference. NATO on one side, we'll have Russia on the other side. We'll bring others in. All the countries of Europe. Maybe bring some Middle Eastern countries in. Maybe we'll bring India and China in. Let's make it a big powwow. And we'll set out a new charter. Some kind of a lot of meaningless platitudes, but at least it'll be a charter vowing to respect one another's security, vowing that we're not going to do anything unilaterally, and vowing that we will, in future, respect Russia's security concerns. We're not just going to go ahead and just, go for NATO expansion and ignore Russia's complaints. Now, obviously, there isn't going to be a lot of enthusiasm within NATO for such a declaration or such a conference or such a charter. But if Trump puts his weight behind it, he could get this. I mean, all right, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, are going to complain. Poland's going to complain. But the sort of the bigger countries of Europe will just go along with it. They'll say, yeah, okay, yeah, well, let's have a global conference. And the British, they usually fall in with the Americans. So the British will go for it. Giorgia Meloni will go for it. Macron will go for it. There'll be public opinion pressure in Germany to go for it. So I think it's quite possible that there'll be some kind of a conference. And so if Russia, which I think, again, a deal like that, basically ceasefire in place, the Zelensky gang remains in power in Kiev, America sends everything it's got to Ukraine, build up Ukraine's armed forces. That's a bad deal for Russia. So, but you can sweeten it, I think, if you give the Russians that conference, that's what they've been asking for. They've been asking for this rerun of Helsinki, and so if you just come along, and all these foreign leaders, as Western leaders, will say, yeah, Russia does have legitimate security concerns, and we pinky promise that in future we will address Russia's security concerns. We're not just going to go ahead and do whatever we feel like doing. That might just sweeten the pot sufficiently for Russia to say, okay, we accept this deal. Otherwise, just simply a ceasefire along current lines of contact, and NATO membership to put off, who knows for how many years, and America goes on arming Ukraine. That's not a good deal for Russia, and I don't think Russia can accept that. But if you sweeten it with some big conference, then that might work for Trump. The interesting thing about Trump, and that's really what struck me really in recent days, when he's been making all these very ambiguous comments, is he doesn't have any of the Russophobic attitudes of almost the entire American foreign policy elite, and generally the NATO foreign policy elite. They're always going on and on about Russia this, Putin that, Putin's a dictator, and so on and so forth. He doesn't have any of that. I mean, so whenever he talks about, well, this war should never have happened, this, if I were president, Putin would never have done this. He says these things, but at the same time, there's never any indication that he has any particular animus towards Russia or to Putin. In fact, he always says, "I have very good relations with Putin," which no other Western leader ever says that. No other Western leader ever boasts that he has good relations with Putin. And he, even when he talks about Russia and Ukraine, he actually is very oddly neutral in the way he talks about it. He doesn't say, "Oh, the horrible Russians invaded these poor little Ukrainian darlings." He never talks like that. He said, "Oh, this war should never happen. Oh, it's a terrible disaster. All the people getting killed, and the city is being destroyed." He never takes anyone's side. He never starts moralizing. Never making it into the familiar morality play of good versus evil. Which means that he, I think he, if it were put to him that the way you can get this deal signed is by promising the Russians some kind of a global conference. This is going to be the Helsinki Redux. He probably hasn't heard of Helsinki, but somebody tell him this was this big conference in 1975, 50 year. This will be the 50-year anniversary of Helsinki. Why not do another one? And I think that would I think appeal to him. He is someone who fancies the Nobel Peace Prize and so on. Now that's a possibility, and I'm not saying that this will happen. And you always have to temper that with the notion that the Americans are perfectly happy with just wars going on, the destructive wars going on, and Trump is not under any kind of political pressure for re-election. which means that, let's say he promised he's going to bring it to an end, the war in Ukraine to an end. He promised that. And then if he were facing re-election, then this will be rammed down his throat and said, hey, you promised you're going to end this. You didn't end it. You're a failure. You're a loser. You misled the American people. So that would be certainly, that would add pressure on Trump, in a re-election, if he was facing re-election. Hey, I got to end this, because otherwise, I'm going to be facing a serious challenge. So he's not under any particular pressure to end this war. I mean, like, if you think of Bill Clinton, why did Bill Clinton go for Dayton in 1995? And then so the meetings in Dayton to end the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the meetings took place in November, December 1995, and then the final treaty was signed in January 1996. Well, because Clinton was facing re-election in 1996, so he was under pressure that if this war is still going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina, then he's going to get blamed for it. He promised to bring this to a satisfactory conclusion to the United States. He hasn't done so. So Clinton was under pressure, particularly as he was facing Bob Dole. Bob Dole was a awful interventionist on Bosnia, and so that's good. But Trump doesn't really face that kind of pressure, and this war really isn't hurting America in any particular way. I mean, America's economic problems are real, but they don't really have anything to do with this war. The Europeans are certainly hurting from this from the war in Ukraine, but it's not. I mean, again, the Europeans have a lot of economic problems, and there isn't any great movement within Europe to bring this war to an end. I mean, I don't see it. I mean, I see Viktor Orban making very good, very sensible points. I see Robert Fico making good, sensible points. But I don't see it too much from anyone else. Marine Le Pen, well, she's all over the place. But in any case, there isn't going to be an election in France until 2027. Who knows what position if the war is going on in 2027, who knows what position she would take then, because she changes her position quite frequently. Germany, there's going to be an election in Germany, and the Alternative für Deutschland is probably going to do well, but not well enough to shape the next government. He's not going to be in the next government. And it's unlikely that Sarah Wagenknecht's party is going to be in the next government either. So there's not going to be any great pressure from Germany either to change the policy. So I'm just saying that you can look at it both ways. You can look that Trump is going to really make an effort to bring this to an end, or you could say that Trump just is going to make a few gestures, and then once he realizes that this is way too complicated, way too difficult, is that that the Ukraine lobby, not just from Zelensky and company, but all the forces within the government that are going to lobby him on behalf of Ukraine. You can't betray Ukraine. You can't betray NATO. You got to stick with them. This will be a humiliation for us. This is going to be a victory for Putin. This is an absolute humiliation for the West. The total defeat, disaster for the West. You can't go down this path. People will say, what the hell? I don't need this headache, particularly as 2026, you got the midterms. The Democrats are very, very likely to retake the House, and as first order of business, the Democrats will impeach Trump. Now, of course, that's not going to go very far, but you know, Trump can't afford to alienate these those powerful war hawks within the Republican Party in the Senate. You know, the Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton, and all the rest of them. So he's got to be really really careful, not to go antagonize the Ukrainians. And of course, suppose Marco Rubio, as Secretary of State, says, "I will resign. I'm going to resign if you go down this path of abandoning Ukraine and allowing Putin to take vast chunks of Ukraine." And what have I mean, Trump really can't afford Rubio, who's the one member of his administration that enjoys bipartisan enthusiasm. Can't really afford Rubio resigning, but it would be a good move on Rubio's part, because obviously Rubio has ambitions for 2028, and a resignation on principle as Secretary of State, that puts him in good stead for his run in for 2028. So it's a it's a very tricky business for Trump. Anyway, let's take a look at what Gagglers are saying on our locals page. So, everybody who who watches us on YouTube, please come to our locals page. Please subscribe to our locals community. And you don't have to pay, but at least if you're a member of the community, that's very, very helpful. So anyway, let's go back. We have so Danaki. Always good to see you, Danaki. Says, "Rejoice, George. Russia keeps winning by leaving Syria faster than the US left Afghanistan in 2021 after the Taliban takeover. And here I was thinking best pal Erdogan would keep them there as leverage with the Americans, as Mercurius the Wise told me." No, I kind of really do agree with you, because I mean, Syria obviously was an important piece of the Russian jigsaw, because why else did Putin make that decision in 2015 to go all in on behalf of Bashar al-Assad? I mean, if Syria didn't really matter, then why do it? What does it matter that you've got the black flag of ISIS flying over Damascus, which is what you've got now? Presumably, that was a very big deal. I mean, obviously, Putin didn't want jihadis infiltrating Russia, particularly the Caucasus or the Central Asia part of Russia. They caused absolute mayhem there during the 1990s, so Putin was worried about that. Putin valued the warm water port at Tartus and the Khmeimim air base, which is Russia's one means of projecting power in the Middle East, and it doesn't have any other bases in the Middle East other than Syria, and since Putin is a man with a strong sense of history, he will have remembered that this alliance with Syria goes all the way back to 1971. And it goes all the way back to the Brezhnev era. So all of these things were important in 2015, so much so that Putin, who didn't finish the job in Ukraine, kind of put that on the back burner and made as his priority saving his ally Bashar al-Assad. Now, that's now gone. And while again there's a lot of speculation. Oh well, here is maybe Russia can negotiate something with HTS. Maybe they can still hold on to the Tartus base and so on. That isn't going to happen. Erdogan has no particular desire to see Russia establish itself in Syria. I mean, he regards all of that, northern Syria, that's all his territory, his sphere of influence. He has no interest at all in helping Putin there. And of course, the Americans are going to apply their leverage with the new rulers that, hey, if you want some kind of support from us, you want financial aid from us, you want diplomatic recognition from us, you need to push the Russians out. We're not going to allow you to keep, we're not going to allow the Russians to establish themselves in Syria. I mean, the whole idea that somehow HTS can defy Turkey, can defy the United States and work out some deal with Russia, it's absurd. It cannot happen. Of course, they're going to demand that the Russians leave, and that's already happening. I mean, it's clear that the Russians are already flying out their forces. They're flying out their equipment. They're already beginning to abandon their bases there. So that's that. Now, it's a real. I mean, we can talk about Afghanistan. I mean, and that was a kind of obviously a pointless war that the Americans waged. However, in terms of what they tried to do, remember, they only went after Afghanistan, because they had to hit somebody or other over 9/11. So that was their first instinct, which is, hey, we got to thump somebody who was behind 9/11. So Americans decided, well, Bin Laden was behind 9/11. Bin Laden had trained. He at the time he was residing in Afghanistan, and so they went after Afghanistan. That's just simply a retaliatory strike. And when they left in 2021, I mean, they did make a commitment when Trump signed that deal, the Doha agreement with the Taliban. The important part of the deal was that the Taliban would no longer provide any aid to Al Qaeda. So far, I mean, at least from what one can gather, so far the Taliban has stuck to that part of the agreement. They haven't provided any Al Qaeda. I haven't heard, even in what's happened now in Syria, that the Taliban played any role, or anyone who was in Afghanistan played any role in Syria. We have Uzbeks coming in to Syria. We have Uyghurs from China coming into Syria, but I haven't heard anything from Afghanistan or the Taliban. So in some ways, the Americans got at least some of their goals accomplished in Afghanistan. Of course, 20 years, trillions of dollars absolutely wasted. There's no question. But I don't think it's quite as big a blow as losing Syria. I mean, Syria was really Russia's entree in the Middle East, and Russia's really mechanism for exerting power, exerting global influence in the world. I mean, America has bases everywhere. This was Russia's one base, and of course that's why Syria was targeted. So that's why when you overturn Russia's ally, you're not then going to turn around. But okay, we'll let Russia keep its bases. Why not? We're in a good mood. Yeah, sure. Why not? You keep your base. Keep projecting Russian power in the world. No, I mean, it's not going to happen. So yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, this is a blow. It's interesting that so far Putin hasn't really said anything very much. So he's given these speeches. He gave a speech to the United Russia Party, that's his political party, and then he gave this big speech at the Ministry of Defense yesterday, and he didn't bring up the subject of Syria, which again, seemed like puzzling. So the problem for Russia, even leaving aside all the questions about the warm water port, the leaving aside the issue of your ally Bashar al-Assad, um, and leave aside also the question that you were using Syria as a means of challenging Western hegemony, as a means of creating a this alternative to the rules-based order, kind of a new kind of alliance of whatever BRIC states or the rejectionist states, with Iran and China and so on. So leave aside that was part of the Putin strategy in Syria. The problem is that when something like this happens, Russia is seen to be weak. And when you're seen to be weak, then no one really feels like making any concessions to you. They only make concessions to you when you look strong. And that's why I think we talked about this, I think, a few weeks ago. And I mentioned this article that was written by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. It was about the wartime negotiations. And so it seemed like a very esoteric article, really, getting into the wartime diplomacy. But what was instructive about this article was, Lavrov's conclusions that the British and the Americans were not interested at all in making any concessions to the Soviet Union in the first couple of years of the war, meaning the first couple of years after the in Hitler's invasion. It was only after Stalingrad, and once they realized the scale and magnitude of the Red Army victory at Stalingrad, that the British and Americans decided that they needed to make concessions. Up until then, they absolutely refused to make any concessions to the Soviet Union. And then, of course, after Stalingrad came the Tehran conference, where the first concessions were made to the Soviet Union. And the point you would draw from that article is that unless you're actually winning, unless you're showing that you can defeat your adversaries, the West isn't going to make any concessions at all to you. And this is the problem with Syria. And Trump, in his tweets and his truths, sort of said that, hey, Russia got beaten. Russia, didn't lift a finger to help Assad. And then Russia, said shouldn't have been there in the first place. And then he blamed Obama for Russia being there at all. And then he said, well, it's probably good for Russia to be out of Syria. And then yesterday at his news conference, Trump, pointedly reminded his audience about how he bombed Syria. And he told that same story he's told before, how he had Xi Jinping over at Mar-a-Lago, and they were having dinner at the time that the Americans launched their bombing attack on Syria, and he saw that as, it's a way of humiliating Assad and humiliating Russia. And so he was boasting about how, I did that. And again, he talked about that chocolate cake, that great chocolate cake that he was eating with Xi Jinping and so on. But that's the point. I mean, Trump and the people around Trump are going to say, well, why didn't Putin do for Assad what he did in 2015? Well, the answer is obvious. Russia is very preoccupied with the war in Ukraine. Russia's not able to fight two wars at the same time. That's not very good because again, if you're a great power, you should be able to fight two wars at the same time. That goes with the territory. You should be able to do it. And Russia hasn't been able to do it. And so Putin kind of, or rather Trump, emphasized this point. Say, hey, well, you gotta. They're not able to do it. They're not able to fight two wars at the same time. So that doesn't strengthen, Russia's hand. Also, have to keep in mind, particularly in light of today's assassination, that the Americans have all sorts of cards left to play. We don't know exactly what the Americans are planning. But we had this assassination today. That's a very senior general, and there may well be further assassinations, further terrorist acts, more attacks inside Russia. So there may be all sorts of cards that the Americans and by then Trump will be in charge that they're going to play to put Russia into a very difficult spot. So that's why just thinking that just saying Russia's winning, and therefore the Americans are going to make concessions to Putin. That's not the way Americans think, and it's certainly not the way Trump thinks, and it's clearly not the way Washington is thinking right now. Anyway, Danaki says, plus the nuclear defense chief got blown to smithereens, and I don't necessarily think it's O2 convenient culprit that everybody's already pointing to, but rather Shoigu cleaning house or something. This is the I don't know. I mean, these are the various conspiracies. The theory that Shoigu had something to do with it. I mean, people are always thinking that about the Russians. The reason I'm having doubts about that is that first of all, Ukraine immediately owned up to it and said, yeah, we did it. He was a legitimate military target. Why would Ukraine own up to it if Shoigu were behind it? Also, the way the media immediately went into action with this whole story of he was really launching chemical weapons attacks on Ukraine. We haven't really heard very much about that. This is the first we heard of it, and suddenly we have this whole thing of the chemical weapons attacks. Even though, as I said, the OPCW said that they didn't have any evidence that there were these chemical weapons attacks in Ukraine, but the way the media were already ready to go with that story, that means that this was spoon-fed to them by the U.S. government. That kind of makes me think that this wasn't an inside job, that this wasn't Shoigu. I'm not a fan of Shoigu, but I'm not sure Shoigu was involved in this. I'd like to see a little bit more action on the tip jar. Well, not I, but those ferocious hounds. As you know, the ferocious hounds, they always grill me, and they attack me, bite me, go for my throat when there's nothing going on in the tip jar. Because they don't blame others. They don't say, oh, it's the fault of the Gagglers, or it's the fault of the freeloaders. No. To them, I'm the one who's at fault. I'm the one who's failing them. And they always blame me exclusively. Everything is my fault. So if you have a few bob in your pocket, as I always say, don't think about me. Think of those hounds and what a hard time they give me. Anyway, Anne-Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And Cynthia, always good to see you, Cynthia. Thank you also for your generosity. And as I always remind Gagglers, Cynthia provides so much fascinating background information for the films that we screen every Monday. That first of all, you should go see the film. It's on the locals page. This is the 7% solution. That was the film that we saw yesterday. But before you even see the film, just read all this fascinating information that Cynthia provides. I always learn so much from that information. I'm sure you will. All Gagglers learn a great deal. So please watch the film and read Cynthia's insights and observations, and then put some money in the tip jar. That's the order of business. Anyway, Cynthia says even if the Israelis can keep cordial relations with HTS, all the chaos they unleashed in Syria is bound to blow back on them. Also, since Syria is just a stone's throw away from Israel, it'll be fairly easy for the blowback to occur on Israel's soil. It's not like Syria is oceans apart from Israel like it is with the US. And even if the blowback doesn't ever occur, the threat of its happening will be so great that nobody will want to vacation or do business in Israel, let alone want to live there. That's a very interesting point. Um, and that really does raise the real question of what ultimately is Israel's and America's goal in the Middle East. Now, one would like to think, and this is how we normally think in rational ways, that Israel and the United States would like stable countries in the neighborhood. They like well-run states in the neighborhood, and then that's the goal. We'll get rid of the people that we don't like, the bad guys, and then we just install into power the good guys, and then we have well-organized states, good governments in the neighborhood. But what if that isn't the goal? What if the goal is the chaos? What if the goal is precisely to destroy all existing states, um, and then in the ensuing chaos, you use that chaos to to basically destroy whomever you want. You used to have states in the Middle East. They were real entities, and Syria was one, Iraq was another, Lebanon was another, Libya was another. They don't exist anymore. They're gone. Those states that that once provided opposition to Israel and above all opposition to the United States, they don't exist. Gaza does not exist. That that part of the entity that was supposed to comprise the state of Palestine just doesn't exist anymore. And if you were to think, well, what America and Israel are planning to do, I think they're very happy to see a complete chaos in Syria, and then they can play off one faction against another. Israel gets a slice of Syria. Turkey obviously gets a slice. Then there'll be some kind of a Kurdish entity. There'll be a kind of greater Damascus. Maybe they'll allow some sort of an Alawite state in Latakia. Just again, you've just broken it up. There just won't be a state anymore. And then you can just play all these statelets or whatever you call them, play them all off against one another. And ultimately, I think Israel and I think the United States always had this goal in mind. How does Israel prevail against all of its Arab neighbors and Arab enemies who, from the beginning, didn't want them there, who didn't want Israel there, didn't want to accept an Israeli state among them. How are you going to deal with that? Well, they tried a few wars, but the wars were, they never really ended in a satisfactory way for Israel, because once the war is over, then your enemies are going to start rebuilding and rearming, and then you're going to have to start doing the whole thing all over again, in 10 years. So what's the most effective way of doing it? Where you just destroy your enemies; they just don't exist anymore, and they, and they would just be break down into fighting factions. Um, and I don't think that that American Israel would just be satisfied with breaking up Syria. That's done. I think Lebanon will be broken up. Um, but I think they're going to move down to the Gulf states. I think they're going to target Saudi Arabia. I don't think they're happy with some guy like Mohammed bin Salman throwing his weight around. Yeah, he's pro-American, pro-Western, and so on, but he can't be relied on. They just find, he's not reliable. He goes off and starts making deals with China. He goes off and starts making peace with Iran. He does deals with Russia over oil. He's getting too big for his britches. So yeah, Saudi Arabia wouldn't be that hard to knock Saudi Arabia off. It wouldn't be hard to knock off any of those statelets. And then you don't have any adversaries anymore. And of course, you do have chaos, but chaos is it's quite a lucrative business. You just, you play off one against another, and then you can fight all your various wars against terror. You're always forever waging war against ISIS. This is really kind of Orwellian. Like in 1984, the forever war against ISIS. Nobody even knows what the hell ISIS is, but we just know we're forever bombing it. Year after year, we're bombing ISIS. So to answer your question, is it really bad? Yeah, it's kind of bad for Israel, but Israel thrives on chaos, because the more chaos there is, the more any kind of pressure on Israel disappears. I mean, by pressure, I mean the pressure on Israel to come to some kind of an accommodation with the Palestinians. And that's why Israel has always gone for war. It's always gone for chaos, because when you're bombing and you're destroying, then you can say, well, what kind of, hey, we don't have a partner. We can't negotiate with anyone. No one's prepared. We can't deal with anyone. I mean, they've always done this. This is exactly what they did that when they invaded Lebanon in 1982. They did that when they essentially went after Yasser Arafat, tried to kill Arafat, eventually did succeed in killing Arafat. It's always, well, we don't have a partner. And so you always create chaos. And so, I mean, you're right that they're going to lose some money in terms of tourism, but I don't know. I come across so many people in Europe who have this fanatical attachment to Israel. Not Jews; they're not even Jews, but it's this obsessive attachment to Israel. And I think they're still going to go to Israel out of some misplaced, bizarre loyalty, love, and faith in Israel. But here in Hungary, the Hungarians. I think I can't exactly explain it, but it has this obsessive love for Israel. Now, maybe they're trying to atone for that they haven't treated the Jews very well, or whatever, or the European right, pretty much across the board, the European right identifies with Israel. So, but I think they're going to keep going to Israel. Whatever the chaos and so on, they're going to keep going there and spending their money and believing that Israel is some extension of Western civilization. Those wonderful beaches and those leafy cities and those really charming restaurants and vistas. That's all part of Western civilization. So it's so unlike those barbaric Muslim hordes or the Palestinians. So I do think, yeah, it's going to go on. The chaos is going to go on, and I think Israel's going to go on making money. And the interesting thing is that Israel and America are kind of on the same page on this. I think so. If we say, well, when we say, is this Israel's policy or is this America's policy? Then I say, yeah, it's yes, I think it's both of their policies. They both pursue that same agenda of triggering chaos. And I think Syria, yeah, that's gone. And I think Iran is next. I think without question they're going to push for regime change in Iran, and I think that's going to happen really within the next 2 years. We're going to see a lot of chaos in Iran. There's going to be all kinds of fighting in Iran. There's going to be scenes of protests in Tehran. Women taking off their hijabs and so on. There's going to be a lot of that sort of stuff coming up in Iran. I think the Americans and the Israelis have now got the bit between their teeth, and they're going to want to see the Ayatollahs, pushed out once and for all. So that's the next domino to fall. Anyway, Cynthia then goes on. So taking all that I said above into account, it seems awfully clear to me that Israel is setting itself up to be a failed state. I don't think. I think that's kind of wishful thinking, because Israel thrives on being or presenting itself to the world as being beset by enemies. So if you have chaos in Syria, then Israel is always defending itself against the chaos, and so therefore, all the more pressure on the Americans and the Europeans to do whatever they can for Israel. And I think Trump clearly is going to be delivering the goods for Israel, financial, economic, weapons, obviously. But in a more sinister sense, I think he's going to really crack down on anti-Israel speech on university campuses or within the U.S. government or really anywhere, on any government property throughout the United States. I think there's going to be a real crackdown on anti-Semitism, quote unquote. So that's again something that they're going to do for Israel, which is, hey, you cannot criticize Israel because then you're anti-Semitic, and therefore, you deserve to be fined or imprisoned. So, I think that the more war there is, the more chaos there is, the more Israel is the propaganda will have that Israel is beleaguered, surrounded by these Muslim savages. I think the better it is for Israel. Israel only has a problem when there's peace. Because when there's peace, then I think all the various different factions within Israel will be at one another's throats. I mean, it is a very divided country. And, Netanyahu has all sorts of legal problems and so on. But when it's at war, then suddenly all these disputes, intramural disputes in Israel, they just vanish. You remember when there were all these massive demonstrations against Netanyahu? Was it a couple of years ago? Remember, huge demonstrations, and then you had the defense minister Gallant coming out, criticizing the Netanyahu's policy on changing the on changing the constitution. That's a problem. You suddenly, hey, there are all these massive hundreds of thousands of Israelis on the streets demanding that Netanyahu goes. Well, how do you get out of a problem like that? Well, you get out of it by war. When there's war, suddenly all the anti-Netanyahu demonstrations have disappeared, and Netanyahu now is probably in the strongest position he has ever been in Israel because he's seen to be a tough guy. He's seen to be someone who is defending Israel, and he's someone who has delivered. He's made he's achieved Israel's goals. He's hey, I killed all these people in Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a shadow of what it once was. Iran is much tamed, and I've crushed Hamas, or at least I'm close to crushing Hamas. We get to keep Gaza, or most of Gaza. Hey, I've achieved what no Israeli leader before me has achieved. So you can demonstrate against me if you like, but it doesn't cut any ice. So I think in Israel, the worst thing ever is peace. And that's why whenever there's things are just quiescent and everything seems to be moving towards some kind of a harmonious resolution of problems, that's the time that Israel strikes. And that's always the most dangerous moment because then there's war and therefore all pressure on Israel disappears. No one's talking anymore about hey, well, maybe you should come to some kind of a deal with the Palestinians. No, boom, that's it. You can't do it. No one to talk to. Marty says, blink 1 for yes, 2 for no. That's an interesting one. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I like that. Marty, then thank you so much. Tuesday. Good evening, George and Gagglers. Marty, always good to see you. Always enjoy all your postings on our locals board. Again, a very good reason to join our locals community because you get Marty's postings, which are often absolutely hilarious, and you get nice reminders of happier days with Monty Python or other gems of British comedy. And Denaki says the judge blocking the release of USS Liberty documents, Marsha J. Peckman. Oy vey, I wonder why. Yes, yeah, that's it. It is sort of amazing. 1967, so it's now 57 years ago. It's kind of it's not even within the living memory of most Americans, and you simply cannot get anywhere with that. It's an extraordinary event. It really was an extraordinary event. I mean, it's like Israel attacks an American spy ship, kills Americans. Israelis killed Americans, and the whole thing was just covered up. And all the stories about Israel made the mistake and so on, ludicrous. And we still can't get hold of these documents. We never will. We never will. And although Trump says he's going to release the documents about the Kennedy assassination, he doesn't say we're going to release the documents about the USS Liberty. No, he's never said that. And then Marty has a picture. Time Magazine's Dog of the Year. There's Johnny Apple. Yes, Dog of the Year. But interestingly, Marty, you posted yesterday Time Magazine's Man of the Year for 1971. I thought that Nixon won Man of the Year in 1972, which was the year that he won the landslide. He did win it in 72, but he shared the prize with Kissinger. Kissinger, I don't think deserved it, but he did share the Man of the Year with Kissinger. But the interesting thing is that he was Man of the Year in 1971, which was the year before his big successes, which came the next year, which was the visit to Beijing. I mean, although it was announced in 1971 that he was going to go to Beijing, or Peking, as it was then known. He was going to visit Peking in February 1972. And then, of course, in May 1972, he visited Moscow and then signed those big two big arms control agreements, the SALT agreement and the ABM treaty. And then, of course, 72 was when he won his huge election victory. But But 71 wasn't immediately obvious to be such a great success for Nixon. First of all, he took America off the gold standard or gold window, whatever it was called at the time, which no one knew at that time what the full repercussions of that would be. And even in 71, it was not clear that the Vietnam War was winding up, or that he would be able to successfully bring the war to a conclusion, at least as far as America was concerned, to bring the Americans out. So it wasn't clear in 71 that he'd be able to do it. The wise money at the time was that Nixon would have a very tough re-election fight on his hands. And that's indeed what Nixon thought. Nixon thought that he would be facing Ed Muskie or Kennedy in 72, or Hubert Humphrey again. And so Nixon himself expected a very tough re-election fight. It didn't turn out that way. Kennedy didn't run because of Chappaquiddick, and then Muskie, self-destructed. And then Hubert Humphrey made a lame effort, but it was just, he was pushed aside by the McGovern juggernaut. And that, so Nixon wasn't expecting a landslide victory. That kind of surprised him. And as he wrote in his memoirs, that because it kind of really surprised him, he kind of plunged into a Great Depression afterwards. He said that was just, from that moment on the election night through till early next year, I was just plunged into this Great Depression, because he wasn't expecting this huge victory. And so it was almost like it was a letdown for him. He was gearing up for this fight, and it was just a letdown that he won so easily. So it's kind of very interesting for him to reveal that he suffered this very serious depression after that election. But I think it was very interesting that he was 71, that he was Man of the Year, and then 72 he had to share it with Kissinger, and I'm not sure Nixon was particularly happy with sharing it with Kissinger. But subsequent, I think during Watergate, when Kissinger was really at the height of his reputation, he, I think Nixon, wanted some of the aura of Kissinger to spread to him, because Nixon was constantly under attack, but while Kissinger kind of enjoyed this glories of media adulation. But so he needed to be seen in the company of Kissinger, so at least some of the hostility to him would dissipate. But anyway, Danaki says, no worries, whatever bad deal the Russians will surely get, you can bet piece of shit scumbag grifters like Pepe Shitkoba, Ritter, Colonel Dougie, Complicatus, the idiot, dumbass, Haifong, etc., will absolutely spin it into a grand victory. So all good for the dumb masses. I think that, unfortunately, it is true that the alt media has not done a very good job in covering the war. Again, the mainstream media have done a very poor job. That goes without saying. Yeah, the New York Times, Washington Post, The Economist, all the rest have done a very poor job in covering the war. The problem is that the alt media has not distinguished itself, because it substituted wishful thinking for serious analysis. And so they've been regaling us with constant stories about fantastic successes, which had no real bearing on reality. I mean, we've been doing this for 3 years, and almost every day for the past 3 years, we're being told that Russia's winning bigly, Ukraine's on its last legs. Zelensky is about to be pushed under the bus. The Americans are about to pull the plug on Ukraine, and there was never really any reality to it. And so when you say whatever the deal will be signed, we can absolutely guarantee that this was being they'll hail it as a fantastic victory for Russia. They'll tell us no, the West was thoroughly outmaneuvered. NATO was humiliated. Its nose was rubbed into its failures, and it had, there was just no reality to it. And then Marty says, Jeffrey Sachs in the recent Tucker Carlson interview used Wesley Clark's, we are going to take out 7 countries in 5 years meme disclosure to explain America's Middle East policy. Has any document ever been released that backs up Clark's rumor? I'm very glad you brought that up. And I've talked about this, before. It just drives me up the wall. And again, this is on the alt media. All the sort of critics of U.S. foreign policy have battened on to this comment of Wesley Clark, Glenn Greenwald, and everybody saying, and you say what you said, Marty, is absolutely right. Has any document ever been presented to confirm this? No. Has Wesley Clark ever named this person in the Pentagon who told him this? No. He absolutely refused to say, well, who, and he's been asked, well, who in the Pentagon told you this? I said, I can't really say. And yet people just repeat and repeat and repeat. And then Jeffrey Sachs, who is who's a professor at Harvard and now he's a professor at Columbia, and he repeats this. And no one ever asks for some evidence. And it's so stupid. It is so deeply stupid. I mean, you don't need to go to Wesley Clark for evidence that America wanted to topple over all of the various opposition rejectionist states. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, they've been doing this for years. You don't need Wesley Clark to come along, repeat some conversation he had with an unnamed official. And it's not even clear why an unnamed official would be talking to Wesley Clark, who had retired years earlier. So he was already retired. He was a retired general. He didn't retire in particular good odor. It should remember he didn't retire in good odor because if you recall, he had been Supreme Allied Commander at the time of the bombing of Yugoslavia. Now, obviously, he was carrying out the NATO plan, which means he was carrying out Bill Clinton's agenda. However, he bombed the Chinese embassy. That was never really explained, how on earth did they manage to bomb the Chinese embassy. But it was an embarrassment for the Clinton administration. Then he bombed the RTS television station. That's radio television of Serbia. So he bombed that, killed 16 people. Obviously a war crime. I mean, they had to do some very fancy footwork to say, oh, well, it was all partly integrated within the Serbian defense infrastructure. Well, if it was, then how come you never tried it again? Because RTS went back to broadcasting immediately afterwards, and you never bombed it again. I mean, it was so integrated within its military infrastructure. Why didn't you do it again? So that was that. And then, most embarrassing of all for Wesley Clark was the chase to Pristina Airport after NATO and the Russians entered Kosovo, and the Russians moved very quickly, and they this is under Yeltsin. They moved quickly, and they took Pristina Airport. And then Wesley Clark just sent his forces to Pristina, and he gave them pretty much the order to start shooting at the Russians, to push the Russians out of Pristina Airport. And that was when he was challenged by the British general. I forgot his name. Maybe his name was something like Mike Johnson. I had such a ubiquitous name. Maybe his name was Mike Johnson. I don't remember the name. I mean, there's a famous photograph of Wesley Clark, Johnson, if that's his name, Bernard Kouchner, and there was another one there, and they were without, surrounding Agim Cheku of the KLA, as well as Hashim Tachi of the KLA, and I think they all had their kind of hands clasped, like the Three Musketeers, one for all and all for one. They all have. So Agim Cheku, terrorist, KLA. Hashim Tachi, terrorist, KLA, and then there's Mike Johnson, I think his name was, the top British general, Wesley Clark, and Bernard Kouchner. So all of them were in this photograph. You can dig it up. It's a Google. And they all clasped their hands. It was one of a truly disgusting, revolting picture. But anyway, Johnson, however, confronted Wesley Clark when Clark pretty much gave the order to start shooting at the Russians at Pristina Airport. Said, "Hey, I'm not going to start World War III for you." So Clark was not in good odor. So when he left, there was really no great no great send off. Clinton just gave a very pro forma, thank you very much for your service, goodbye. So there was no particular reason why Clark would be wandering around the Pentagon in 2002, which is about 3 years after he was pretty much bundled out from his job. And why anyone would be talking to him, because this would presumably be some Pentagon official who was in the Republican administration, so part of George W. Bush. So why would he be talking in this very frank way to Wesley Clark? And then the other thing was that Wesley Clark at the time was trying to run for the 2004 Democratic Party nomination. And he was trying to present himself in a phony, deceitful way that he, obviously a four-star general, former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and he was against the Iraq War. He wasn't, actually. He pretended he was, but he wasn't. So he was trying to show, well, he's so much better than, so much more reasonable than these nutcases in the Bush administration. So he had every incentive to make up this whole story. And ultimately, if you can't produce a document and you can't tell us who was this person who told you about this 7 countries in 5 years, then you have to say you're a liar. And he lied. He was a liar during the time of the bombing of Yugoslavia. And I think it's really dismal, pathetic, and contemptible that people who should know better go around citing Wesley Clark's comment and believing it. No one says, who was this person in the Pentagon who told you this? Do you have any documentation? Did you have notes that you took at the time of this conversation? And again, you don't need Wesley Clark to confirm that U.S. policy was about knocking out 7 countries in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. I mean, the Americans are quite explicit about what they intend to do. So, so it's very good, Marty, you remember that how absolutely pathetic, Jeffrey Sachs says this, again, as a Columbia professor, and you really do expect something a little more from him. That's it. Nadia's got that picture. So if you look on the locals page, there's that picture. So there's Hashim Thachi, Bernard Kouchner, that's I think that guy named Johnson. I think the General Johnson, or maybe Jackson. Not Johnson, Jackson. I think General Jackson, Michael Jackson, the British general. Next to him is Agim Cheku. He was an Albanian, but who fought for the Croatians in the war in 1991, the Croatians against the Serbs. So he got around, and there's the nauseating Wesley Clark. So thank you, thank you, Marty. As always, you dig these things up so quickly. It's amazing. Anyway, where are we? Yeah, so anyway, go back, and then Oh, Marty says blink one for yes, yes, two for no. That's a Skripal case. Yes, that's um, and then Marty says WikiLeaks with no evidence. This is WikiLeaks. Let me see what with no evidence. Let me click on this. What this is about. WikiLeaks with no evidence. Here we are. WikiLeaks. Former general of the U.S. Army Wesley Clark on the military strategy after 9/11 attacks. We are going to take out 7 countries in 5 years: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing it off with Iran. Yeah, that's right. And again, he was saying this at the time that he was running for the Democratic Party in nomination. If you recall, the Democrats were terrified that some anti-war nutcase is going to win the nomination of the Democrats. Howard Dean was doing well in the polls because he seemed to be against the war. He wasn't. Again, he wasn't against the war. He was just arguing that, oh, well, George W. Bush, he didn't get a permission slip from the UN Security Council. So if we got a permission slip from the UN Security Council, Howard Dean, would support the invasion of Iraq. It was a very weak argument. It was bound to fail. I mean, what American is going to say? Well, I would only support an invasion of Iraq if the UN Security Council gave it the go-ahead. I mean, you're not going to win an election in America that way. But nonetheless, they were worried that Howard Dean was leading in the polls. So they brought in Wesley Clark, with the fruit salad medals on his chest. And so, good. Now we're going to get an anti-Iraq war position. Nobody's going to call Wesley Clark a peacenik, a weedy peacenik. So that's when he came up with these this ridiculous story about what he heard at the Pentagon. And you're right. It was I didn't realize that WikiLeaks had also posted that. And Denaki says, fun fact: singer James Blunt was driving the first British tank into Pristina. Well, I guess, yeah. I mean, I don't really know who James Blunt is, but yes. Okay. He was driving the first British tank into Pristina. Yeah, that was about. But Jackson at the time, I mean, there were still sensible people who would say, "I'm not going to start World War III for you." I mean, that's a kind of. It seems like ages ago now. Everyone's now quite happy to start World War III, but back then, in 1999, there was still some fear that that you really don't want to provoke the Russians. So, but Clark was ready to start shooting. He was just ready to start shooting at the Russians at Pristina airport. Anyway, I think my time is up. So thank you everybody who joined me. Thank you very much for everyone who. So Peru says, even if he did it for political reason, does not mean that he lied. One can spill the beans for all kinds of reasons. Your logic is correct. However, you need to present some evidence in support of your case. And he has been repeatedly asked over the years, who was this person in the Pentagon who told you this? Why are you being so discreet? Why did you, after all, years have gone by. You can tell us who did it. Otherwise, that's just a very convenient story to tell, burnish your somehow anti-Bush credentials. And indeed, he's become famous. I mean, everyone's forgotten about the bombing of Yugoslavia, except for a few of us. And how do people know anything about Wesley Clark? Because of this claim, for which he has presented no evidence. And look, Wesley Clark is a liar. I mean, he lied throughout that time of the bombing. I mean, he's one of the worst liars around. So there's no particular reason to believe anything he says. He doesn't have a record of truthfulness and integrity behind him. So given that, and given that he hasn't come up with any documentary evidence in his support, then I'm sorry, I'm going to say I don't believe you. I mean, I think it's 7 countries in 5 years. I think probably that has been the American plan. Not 5 years was a little bit economical. I don't even know why he picked on the 5 years. Again, it sounds like he was trying to do this. This will happen under George W. Bush, as he was trying to make a political point. Because 5 years, because it does seem strange why any U.S. official would start talking about 5 years. I mean, it's you're not going to knock out 7 countries in 5 years. I mean, it's a long process. It could take 25 years, but 5 years is a little fast. So, but if you have a short window, which is he's trying to make the points against the Bush administration, then you pick on 5 years. So I'm sorry. I'm not buying it. I know Wesley Clark. I know this is a person not to trust. So if you're not able to present the documentary evidence, then yeah. Guni 97 says, if Obama hadn't killed Osama bin Laden, he would have become head of state in Afghanistan. That negotiating would have been funny to watch. I don't know. I mean, it's a very good question because bin Laden. I don't know how much of that whole story to believe. The killing of bin Laden. Remember, I mean, bin Laden had been reputed to be dead for many years before that. It was quite surprising when they announced that he'd been killed. This is 2011. He was already quite an old man, at least if we believe the stories, that he hadn't been killed. But we never really saw the body. There was no some kind of a forensic examination. They killed him and then they immediately buried him at sea, which itself was very strange. So I have to be again very suspicious when you kill someone and then you immediately get rid of the body, so that at least we'd have some forensic evidence that it happened, that this is the person that you claim is Osama bin Laden. We can do all the DNA tests, the dental tests, and whatever, so that we can actually get confirmation that this is the man that you did. I mean, remember with Hitler, the Soviets were very suspicious that this person that they found, the Red Army found in the bunker, was actually Hitler. So they had to pick up the body, fly it into the Soviet Union for all the forensic tests. They didn't have DNA in those days, but they would have to do the dental tests and everything else, so that Stalin and everyone else was actually convinced that this person really was Hitler. Hitler really was dead. And I think the same applies to when you have bin Laden, who has been the subject of American obsession for so many years. You want to be absolutely cast iron certain that this was indeed Osama bin Laden, not somebody who just vaguely looked like bin Laden, particularly as this was in Pakistan. It wasn't even in Afghanistan. So I don't know. I remain skeptical. I'm not saying that he wasn't killed on that occasion, but I'm just saying that I remain skeptical about about that whole killing. But I don't know whether in 20 he was what can I let's see. Well, let me go back. Anyway, Danaki says there is some pretty strong circumstantial evidence that bin Laden checked into the American military hospital in Doha in July 2001 with his kidney problem. He was probably long dead before 2011. Yeah, I read that as well, that he was already very ill in 2001. And in fact, there were a lot of stories in 2001 after 9/11 that Bin Laden was already dead. So I have to say, it was quite astonishing that 10 years later, Obama turns around and kills Bin Laden. He's like, I had assumed he was already dead because we hadn't really heard anything from him. Remember, he used to send out these videotapes, where he'd be ranting in his usual fashion, death to America and so on, and then he stopped doing it, and we didn't hear any more of these videotapes. So because these videotapes just disappeared, the assumption was that he was dead. And again, I hate to have to say it, 2011. Now, what happened in 2011? Well, that's a year before he's running for re-election. So he needs to chalk up some success for his surge in Afghanistan. Remember, this is, he promised the surge in Afghanistan. He delivered a surge in Afghanistan. So he has to show that the whole thing was justified, and this was how he justified it. Hey, we got Bin Laden. We killed him. So, and then Danaki goes on. The guy in the November 2001 video claiming 9/11 sure as heck doesn't look like the real Bin Laden. No, that's that's very true. I mean, it was always, all of those videotapes were very dubious, and in fact, I don't remember any real tape with Bin Laden actually confessing to the 9/11 attacks. He seemed to be suggesting that he was behind it, but I don't remember ever really confessing that he masterminded the 9/11. I think there was. I remember a videotape. It was a long time ago now. I remember a videotape saying, "Oh, I always get blamed for everything." So it was obvious that they would blame me for 9/11. So I haven't seen it. Maybe somebody else has seen videotape where some statement from him where he admits to being behind the 9/11 attacks. But I don't think those videotapes did that. So FX Trader says the USA could have gotten Bin Laden in Sudan, and they didn't go for it. Seems very strange. No, I think that was always very interesting. Why did they send? They absolutely could have killed him in Sudan. Why did they send him to Afghanistan? What purpose did he send? Because I think the Taliban, I think they took over in about, it was 98 or something. Yeah, 1998. I think maybe the Taliban took over. So they sent him to Afghanistan. Now, my suspicion at the time was that they wanted to use Bin Laden and the Taliban to create armies of jihadis to make problems for the Russians and for the Chinese. I think the Americans were very happy with that. I think the Americans wanted to create these terrorist camps and then send them out into Russia, send them out into Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, which they did. I mean, these jihadis were in Chechnya, the jihadis were in Bosnia, they were in Kosovo. And so the Americans really were quite happy with that. They weren't counting on Bin Laden turning against the Americans after all the Americans had done for him. I mean, he had been working for the Americans for years, going back to the 1980s, and with the creation of the Mujahideen. So he was a kind of a CIA asset for so many years. So they thought he would go on being a CIA asset. They weren't expecting him to turn around and attack the United States. So that's why I think that's why they didn't kill him in Sudan and just packed him off and allow the Taliban to look after him. Anyway, so thank you everybody who joined me today. Thank you for all of your comments, questions, and insights. Thank you above all to those who very generously contributed. I'm still going to have to face those hounds tomorrow. They're very unhappy. They're not going to be happy tomorrow So it's going to be a very, very tense exchange with Apple and Buddy. I mean, they're not in good mood. This I complain about these winter days. Can imagine how awful it is for them. So it's going to be hard for me, but we will be back Thursday, same time. Please join me. Till then, goodbye, good night. See you Thursday.